hyperdrive blows are going to be pieces of us in 3 different systems. What'd you do?
I bypassed the compressor.
Smart characters could absolutely ruin your screenplay. And when I say ruin, I mean destroy it before you even write a word on the page. I say this and you immediately go into your archives of all the great movies led by smart characters. Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible, Harrison Ford in Indiana Jones, Robert Downey Jr. in Iron Man, Tom Hanks in The Da Vinci Code. All hyper-intellects and all successful movies both critically and with audiences. Regardless, I'm going to show you how these films could have been even better if their protagonists weren't so damn smart. I'm going to show you how you can integrate these techniques into your own screenplays. Are you ready to begin? Some time ago, one of my screenwriting students sent me her screenplay to review. I noticed she'd done something I see in a lot of the work of new writers. That is, creating protagonists with godlike levels of intelligence and intuition. There is a reason for this which makes perfect sense. It's simply easier to write stories that way. The problem is, when you do this, you dramatically diminish the potential of your screenplay to shine. So I gave my students some advice I'm going to give you. I talked to her about magic. Some of the biggest blockbusters in cinema history have hinged on protagonists that were hyper-intelligent. In fact, you could argue that, at least in our world, these characters would be seen as magicians. One of the most iconic scenes in the Mission Impossible series happens in the first film, where Ethan Hunt breaks into the secure vault. This scene is outstanding in terms of tension and presentation. But how did Ethan know how to do any of the things we witnessed? I mean, up to this point in the film, was there any reason for us to believe he was a high-end computer hacker and gymnast combined? This is the definition of magic. Doing something without logic or explanation. The thing is, that is why we go to a magic show, to be wowed by the tricks. The fact that we have no idea how the magician actually does those tricks is what we expect. It's what we want when we go to a magic show. If we knew how he did the trick, the illusion is gone and they wouldn't be a very good magician. While this may be great for that kind of entertainment, it's not great for your screenwriting. Even in a fantasy movie, there has to be inherent logic established in the lore of the world that we create. That is a story for another video, but fantasy writing is one of the most difficult to execute well because you need to create rules for the world that must be adhered to and still offer a level of drama and excitement, even though the actions could never happen in our reality. Anyway, back to Ethan Hunt and Robert Landon. Imagine the impact of seeing those same scenes, but knowing through the screenplay that Ethan Hunt spent years training in computers, which led him to devising the specific plan because he could use that skill. Or Langdon knew how to crack the Mona Lisa code because he'd already been working on that code for decades and was only missing one piece which he found in that room in that scene. This is rough, but you get the idea. Of course, I understand that suspension of disbelief is part of filmmaking and storytelling, and these leaps of faith in those films worked well and thrilled audiences. However, this video is about how characters that are too smart can hold your stories back. A great example of an excellently constructed smart character is in the movie Good Will Hunting. Sure, he's able to do amazing mathematical calculations with little effort, but it is counterbalanced by the major consequences of his talents and how much he has struggled with it all his life. This is presented in the first act of the script with his living conditions, poverty, and signs of abuse. We almost feel sorry for him as opposed to detached because of his genius. You know when you're watching a film and something happens and it's revealed that one of the characters planned everything? That the character was so smart he had everyone fooled, including you, the audience.
You're no messiah, you're a movie of the week. You're a fucking t-shirt, at best.
It's the Scooby-Doo effect, where the bad guy reveals himself to have been with the heroes the entire time, right under their noses. Sure, this can be done well, and one of the most mind-blowing examples of that is in the movie Seven. This "he planned it the whole time" thing wasn't a bad thing in this particular movie. That's because the rest of the film is so well constructed that you can believe it's possible that the killer planned the entire thing that led to the ending that we witnessed.
What's in the box? What's in the fucking box?
However, like what happened in The Dark Knight where the Joker revealed he planned all his actions to make a point, it requires an almost godlike level of human behavior prediction on the part of the villains. They'd need to know exactly how the heroes would react to every permutation of their plan for it to be effective.
What are you trying to prove? That deep down, everyone's exactly as you. You're alone.
I argue that this system only really works in genres where the audience already suspends their disbelief, such as horror and fantasy, which also includes superhero movies, by the way. Once you get into drama and thrillers, you're walking a tightrope. So how could you guard against issues with this in your own screenplay? Here's a quick system you can use. So you take your narrative line and you have your plan laid out in your outline. This can either be for your antagonist or villain, but I suggest both. What you want to do is list out all the ways each can slow down or affect the plans of the other. This then allows you to devise ways they can overcome those obstacles. The result is something we all want in our screenplays: tension. Once you have this, it makes it easier to interrogate the logic of your overlaps between the characters and what does and does not make sense.
Damn good stuff, sir. Now, about this pickle.
There are things being negotiated now that are going to solve all your problems and answer all your questions. That's all I can tell you now.
You can then do the same thing for your character arc against your overall story arc. Doing this can save you weeks or months of work by avoiding issues way before they happen when you're actually writing the screenplay. This leads me to the next way smart characters can damage your screenplay: process. This is the how a character does what he does.
This mustn't register on an emotional level. First, distract target. Then block his blind jab. Counter with cross to left cheek.
If you don't write in your screenplay how your character thinks, plans, and adapts to events that change those plans, you very quickly fall into the magic area. Your audience no longer believes or identifies with your character, and that character essentially becomes a superhero if you go too far. Take The Fast and the Furious, where Dominic Toretto and his crew are able to execute incredible heists with very little visible planning, outside of telling us what they're going to do.
So let me get this straight. There's only one road that leads in or out. Sheer drops on every side. A motorcade from hell protected by a small army from 1 mile in either direction?
Yeah. About it.
The opposite of this, and easily one of the best examples of incredible systematic storytelling for a smart character, is Ellen Ripley in Alien and Aliens. If you want to see how to write a smart character, you have to watch those films. Ripley starts both films with a certain level of knowledge and ability, but events in the film force her to adapt and learn new things in order to overcome the alien threat. This is a technique that benefits greatly from your character bios, which is something I talk to members of my community about. You as the writer need to know everything about your characters going into your screenplay, which allows you to then write how they would react to events in the story.
Girl like this. Shut up! You shut up! Shut up! Shut up!
This helps you integrate their process into the story so it's organic as opposed to boring and slow. It gives you their primary plan, which is what they have going into the story and established in Act 1. Then the character bio will inform you on the step-by-step process they would go through in each scenario you have in your story. The next issue with smart characters is an obvious one: relatability. Take The Matrix. Neo starts out semi-relatable in terms of being a hacker, but working in a normal 9-to-5 corporate office. He hates his job, and many people can relate to that situation. However, very quickly he gains powers that make him unrelatable and all-knowing, which really takes hold in the second film, The Matrix Reloaded, where he's essentially a god. This was one of the things that made the second film less compelling than the first. However, there is a way to do the same thing but create an all-knowing character that your reader can still identify with. You do this by creating flaws or doubt, or both. Again, this is a more advanced idea because it needs to be something that works organically with the powers of your protagonist and is compelling enough to amplify your narrative. One of the absolute best examples of this is in Unbreakable, the M. Night Shyamalan movie with Bruce Willis. David Dunn is a superhero who's been hiding from the truth of his powers. Even as he discovers his powers, he's a reluctant hero. and his family life really humanizes him for us as the audience. No matter how strong he gets, we never lose our connection to him because of his flaws and his doubts. What I'm explaining here is the reason every superhero has a weakness, whether it's kryptonite for Superman or the impact of rage on the Incredible Hulk. Without it, the audience can't relate to them. Even ancient writers knew this. In Greek mythology, Achilles' heel was his weakness, and in the Bible, Samson's hair was his. The next issue with oversmart characters is important for any aspiring screenwriter, and that's growth. Your character has to have somewhere to go. I talk about this to my students in my module on character development, but to put it simply, your character must change. Here is the start state, midpoint, and end changed state. In essence, the bigger the change, the better, as long as it's believable. If your character is too smart in the beginning of the story, he has nowhere to go, and your reader or audience will check out of your screenplay. Think about the films you've watched where the characters were so smart and all-knowing in the first act that they really couldn't get any better than they already were. Were you interested in watching them? Did you care how the story ended? In fact, such characters are typically villains because their function is to use their hyper-intellect to fool the hero. Think Lex Luthor in Superman. The final element of why smart characters can hamper your story is the one most of you probably feel when you watch films with hyper-intelligent protagonists. They're boring. And boring is something no one wants for their screenplays. A great way to get around this in your writing is to use any of the previous techniques I mentioned, such as creating believable flaws and doubts in that character. Tyrion Lannister in Game of Thrones is a wonderful example of a smart character with flaws and doubt. Tyrion's intelligence is balanced by his insecurities, his emotional struggles, and his complex relationships, making him deeply engaging beyond just his wits and smarts.
What you see is a dwarf. If I had been born a peasant, they might have left me out in the woods to die. Alas, I was born a Lannister of Casterly Rock. Things are expected of me.
Another fantastic example is Superman the movie with Christopher Reeve. He is literally the most powerful being in the world and could have been an incredibly boring character to watch for 2 hours. However, Mario Puzo and Richard Donner gave him struggles with self-doubt and acceptance by humanity. He's also looking for love, and his relationship with Lois Lane further connects him to us, even though we can't fly or shoot lasers out of our eyes. I know this was a lot to digest, but watching this video a few times will allow it to sink in and become really straightforward in terms of logic and execution. Regardless, I created this channel to help new and aspiring writers. So if you want to learn more about screenwriting basics, tips, and advice, I recommend signing up to my newsletter linked in the description and watching these playlists right here.